I don't forget it. Thank you for coming, and shortening your coffee break to be here. This comparative study is part of a much larger project on the use of tangible interaction in museums. In the MESH project, we've moved away from the use of mobiles and apps and designed bespoke installations to explore if and how tangible interaction can create a deeper engagement with the heritage. We've done a number of installations, and the Atlantic Wall exhibition, that is the context of this study, is one of those.
The exhibition, The Hague and the Atlantic Wall, explores the impact of the Atlantic Wall structure on the city of The Hague during the war and what it meant for civilians and all people living here. At the beginning of the exhibition, you can choose from what perspective you want to visit the exhibition, and that's where the mesh technology comes in.
So the object I chose was this one, which was lots of Dutch civilians talking about their experience during the war. And it was great because actually you hear all these personal stories, and I think you get far more than you would do just going around and reading it. And it was really helpful as well, because you've got the voice in your ear, but also you can see different things on the screen, and the two go together. So you kind of build up an audio-visual picture of what was happening at the time. So I found it really easy to use. It's good.
So as you have seen in the Atlantic Wall exhibition, the visitors choose among a set of smart replicas of original objects. Each object mapped a language, English or Dutch, and a perspective. So the sugar box you have seen in the clip and the tea bag represented the Dutch civilians. The beer mug and the dictionary were for the point of view of the German soldiers, and then the armband and the pass were for the officer. The exhibition was very well received. Over 40% of the visitors actually engaged with the replicas and used them. We logged well over 14,000 unique uses of the replicas, and the museum own survey showed that this was the most successfully interactive section they've ever had. Nevertheless, I kept receiving continuously questions like, why not an app? So the motivation for the comparative study is because I wanted to have empirical evidence to be able to reply back, because tangible is better. And the study compared tangible and phone as different ways to control multimedia content within the exhibition. However, the replicas, as you can see here, they fuse two different features. One is the functionality of controlling the media by manipulation and tangible. And the second is the aesthetic that is embedded in the crafting of every single replica. So to be able to study the function and the aesthetic as a separated properties, we introduce a third different mode, that of the smart card. So the smart card has the same functionality as the replica, but has a different aesthetic value. And with this setting, we aim to find out what the visitors preferred and why. We also wanted to see if there is a difference by using the phone or the replica, if the behavior of the visitors is different. And finally, we wanted to have a sense of what it is the personal attitudes of visitors with respect to downloading apps. This is a trend among the museum professionals. So the experimental setup, as I mentioned, is three conditions: the replica, the card, and the phone. And the 76 participants used all of them, so it was a within-subject experimental setup. Each interaction mode was used at 3 stations, so 9 different positions were visited during the experiment. And after each mode was used, we asked the participant to fill in a questionnaire trying to assess their overall impression. So the ease of use, the usefulness, but also playfulness and comfort, and so on. At the end, when all the 3 modes have been used, we addressed directly the comparison, asking what was the most liked and the least liked of the 3 modes and why. And we finished with 5 questions on the attitude of the phone or app in museums. The data collection was carried out over 2 weeks with regular opening times or opening hours of the museum. That meant it was a naturalistic situation, and our participants had to negotiate their visit with other visitors present. This meant also that we had school visits at times that created a lot of noise and queuing, and the 6 participants that took part in the experiment with the, when the school was there, all of them preferred the phone. The data collection was both on questionnaires that I mentioned and also observations of the behavior of the visitor, of the participants. I don't have the time to go through all the details. You can find all of them in the paper. I'm just pointing out a few of the things that I consider important. First of all, the most evident result is that the phone is the most disliked of everything. It appears also to be the most liked. However, if we count the 36% of participants who like the replica, with the 8% of people who consider replica and card the same, then we have 45% of people preferring the replica. That is the highest. And if we add the 15% of the cards, then we have a substantial 60% of preferences for the tangible against the 40% of the phone. Very much this reflects on the dislike, because the 55% of dislike in the phone is very close to the 60% of preferring the tangible. One other thing we look at is that there is this sense among museum professionals that the phone and the digital technology in general is for the younger generation. They would be the one engaging with the phone the most. So we ran a chi-square test to see if that was the case, and we didn't find any evidence. So preference or dislike do not depend on the age at all. Actually, we found some of the elderly having quite a strong position against the replica, as the quote there says. What we didn't expect at all is to find 15% of participants who prefer the cards. And if we add to this one the 80% that was indifferent to card or replica as the best, then we have nearly a quarter of participants that were kind of indifferent to the aesthetic of the replicas. We ran a thematic analysis on the motivations why that were given for why liking or disliking, and the phone was liked because of the independence that it gave, the possibility of moving freely, not to have to wait if the station was busy, but disliked because it cuts away from the exhibition itself and distracts from the objects. The replica was considered easy, playful, and physically engaging, but that was disliked because it forced the people to stay in the same place. And the card was liked because it was practical but considered boring. So if you look at the type of comments that people left, then you can see 2 opposite directions, the movement and the engagement. And this could suggest an effect on the mode of the interaction on the behavior of the people. This indeed could reflect some of the findings in the study, some of the intuition in the literature, that seems to suggest that mobiles grab the attention of the visitors, and then visitors do not look at the exhibition as much as it expected. So to find out, we analyzed the participants' behavior that we observed during the experiment. And we coded their behavior with respect to 2 factors, the focus of attention and the body posture. The focus of attention, we looked at where the people were looking at, the phone, the objects, information close by or far away, if they concentrated on one or few elements, and if they shifted their attention among the many. The body posture, then we look at the position of themselves with respect to the case, but also how the phone was held, and if they moved, and how often they moved. So we use this coding to classify this behavior, and we used 2 of the type of classification of the ethnographers, Veron and Lavasseur. They identified 4, but 2 are the relevant ones here. The ant is the visitor that stops often, gets close to the exhibit and observes, while the fish moves frequently, rarely gets close to the objects to observe. So because the phone allows the movement, while the tangible asks forces participant to stay put, then these two interactions modes seems to map the fish, the behavior with the phone, and the ant behavior with the tangible. Therefore, if the interaction mode has an impact on the visiting behavior, then we could expect that the visitor would behave like fish with the phone and like ant with the tangibles. I collected a few clips to give you a sense of what it is they were doing. You can see there my colleague Sinead collecting and observing. The gentleman with the green and blue shirt is an ant, while the lady in black is a fish. And you can see how they behave, how often they move, and what they do with the mobile phone. The lady is very mobile, while the gentleman is more focusing on places. So the observation notes were analyzed, and each participant was classified to be a fish or an ant, depending on their focus of attention and their body posture. So participants who stay still and kept their focus were classified as ant, while participants that move and shifted their focus were classified as fish. As you can see, he's still there, paying attention. This is an ant with the replica. You can see her staying very still and paying attention to the content and looking at the projection on the case. Again, ants were really absorbing the exhibition, so not only the multimedia content we provided, but also the information all around. And we'll have the fish in a moment. The fish, you can see here, she's not paying any attention to the projection. Actually, she stops listening before the narrative is completely over. Here again, she's looking on the ceiling, looking around, never looking inside the case properly. So we then looked at how people behave, if they change behavior, and actually a quarter of the participants only actually behaved like ants with the tangible and as a fish with the phone, while the vast majority, they kept their own behavior, and not surprisingly, their preferences for the mode that maps them the best. So the fish prefer the phone and the ant prefer the tangible. So the mobile actually diverted the visitor's attention from the exhibition onto the device, but only if the visitor's attitude is that of an ant. That is to say, if they are already people that pay attention to details. So paradoxically, when using a phone, an ant may end up seeing less of the exhibition than a fish. We then looked at the use of mobile devices in case nothing else is available, and you can see that a very high percentage of people who actually would like to use the mobile phone. Although half of them would expect the museum to provide it, it's encouraging to see that 60% would actually be willing to download an app on their own mobile phone. But when we asked if they have already done this in the past, the result is that only 20% of people have done it. And if we consider this with respect to the whole sample, that is only 17% of people who have actually went to the trouble to download. So this posed the question if that is worth going through the development of an app, if the uptake in the end could be so small. The reason of not using a mobile phone, they have multiple choices, and I pointed out the two most important. So from one side is the management of the mobile phone, not wanting to pollute it with extra apps. But there is a very strong half of the participants didn't want to spend time on the phone because they are there to visit, so showing that going to the museum is something that takes it up, is different from everyday life. So by choosing only the phone as a way of providing, augmenting the experience of being there, the museum risks to alienate those visitors actually there more available to get engaged and interested in the exhibition. So if we want to summarize how visitors responded to this technology, first of all, the tangible interaction is preferred over the phone. This is consistent across all the groups, so it's not depending on who they are. But the preference is due to personal attitude, and the fish prefer the phone and the ant, while the ant prefer the tangibles. And their attitude doesn't change during the whole exhibition. This, in a sense, is very important for the design, because what we could do is to amplify, so to design the experience, to map the visiting style to the type of interaction mode. So, for example, tangible offer an immersive experience for the ant, and we observed that they respond very quickly to any hint that was in the narrative to look at the objects and observe the object. While instead we can have that the phone is designed to give an overview or a commentary that does not require the visitors to pause to any specific point and look. So museums should really consider the possibility of offering both or multiple different experiences, because in this case, one size doesn't fit all. And if you want to have more information about the project, that's the URL, and please get in touch with me if you have any interest. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Linda, Virginia Tech. I do have a question. I'd like to hear your thoughts on...
Could you speak louder, please?
Sure. My name is Linda from Virginia Tech. I was wondering if you can speculate about, most of the observation you did was the visitors were using passive device, so they were passively using either the phone or the card. Do you think it will make any difference if they were actively engaging with the exhibit? Like if the exhibit required them to take a photo and the photo was part of the process of using the app. Do you think it will make a difference as far as the engagement and their reception of using the app is concerned?
Well, I would first of all argue that the fact that they are passive, because they were making choices. They were making choices on moving around, deciding where to go. We have done a number of other observations apart from these comparative studies. And the fact that people have objects in their hand and they can use them to trigger the multimedia content surprised us, because it's considered much more engaging and important than, for example, having a series of buttons and doing something of that sort. And it's probably two very different sets. So, social media, showing that you've been to a museum and put yourself in social media is very, very different from getting engaged with the exhibition itself. So I don't see the two in contrast, because I see them belonging to two very different type of behavior and interaction you can have in museums.
Hi, I'm Ya-Liang Zhuang from Eindhoven University of Technology. Thanks for your talk. I have two questions. First, I saw when you mentioned about you compare the result with the age. I see you start from the group from 40, the age of 40. To,
yes.
Why was you choose the 40?
Because of the conditions of the chi-square requires to have a minimum number of
size.
Exactly, sample size. So the splitting below 40 and all the rest is due to the fact that the key test required that to be reliable.
Yeah, okay. Second question is about the knowledge of depth. For example, when I visit some museum, the museum gives us some quiz or questions to evaluate how do you know from the exhibition. And in your study, did you provide this kind of evaluation to understand how depth they get?
The museum ran their own evaluation, as I was mentioning before, and they have their own parameters. Now, we didn't measure any learning, but the point of the exhibition was not the learning of facts there. Actually, the design was done in co-design, and the purpose of all the interactive part was to complement what was already on display. So all the content was personal stories or material for the archives, so that they added an extra dimension to what was already on display. And very often, if you look at the museum literature, people don't go to museum for learning. There are very many reasons, including just for relaxing or recharging. So personally, I don't think that going and measuring how much you have learned would be a good measure of the experience anyway.
Yeah, thank you.